On September the 8th, 2022, at 3:10 p.m. British summertime, the Queen of England died at the age of 96, ending her 76-year reign on the throne. That evening, in a 35 square metre apartment in a working class neighbourhood in the east side of Paris, a slightly overweight, middle-aged English teacher from London with a moderately successful YouTube channel started receiving text messages and emails. The English teacher in question was me, and the messages I received were from students and former students, all of whom were French, offering me condolences on my loss. My loss? I know what you're thinking, but no, I'm not the illegitimate love child of the Queen and Richard Attenborough. Don't believe the rumours. No, to be clear, I am a poor and simple lad, and I have never met the Queen. The closest I came was when I attended a cricket match at Lord's in the early 1980s. The Queen and Prince Philip were there, and I'm sure she waved in my direction. But no, I teach English. I've taught hundreds, perhaps thousands of students over the years that I've been teaching. However, I almost never bring up the subject of the royal family in class. And I'm not even a royalist. But the French seem to have a fascination with the British royal family that almost surpasses that of Britain. In France, the coronation of Charles III was broadcast live on 3 channels and was watched live by 9 million people and 400 million people worldwide. Now, as a British teacher in Paris, I'm constantly asked about my opinions on the royal scandals du jour. It's always assumed that as a British person, I would be a royalist, that I have an insatiable fascination with palace intrigues and gossip, and perhaps that I wear Union Jack boxer shorts and stand at attention and sing God Save the Queen before I go to bed each night. French TV gives virtually no coverage to the Republican side of the debate. So this video is dedicated to all my lovely students, past and present, so that I'll never again have to explain in class the history of the royal family, who got dethroned, who got executed, how rich they are, where they get their legitimacy from, do they have any actual power? And let's start by asking you a question. How far can we trace back the current lineage of the royal family? I think some of you with a good knowledge of British history will have answered 1066, when William I, also known as William the Conqueror, also known as William the Bastard, invaded England and took the throne. The Norman conquest of England brought the House of Normandy to power. William the Conqueror, Duke of Normandy, became the first Norman King of England. Charles III is a direct descendant of William the Conqueror, albeit through various lines of ancestry. But can we go back further? Yes, we can. In fact, we can go all the way back to this guy, Cerdic. According to the Anglo-Saxon Chronicles, was an Anglo-Saxon from present-day Germany who landed in Hampshire in 495 AD with 5 ships full of warriors. And he ruled Wessex from 519 to 534 AD. All Anglo-Saxon kings were descended from Cerdic, and so have been all monarchs of England from William II to Charles III. That's 1,500 years. Some other interesting facts about the royal family. 3 kings have died in battle. Harold II at the Battle of Hastings in 1066. Richard I died in 1199. King Richard, also known as Richard the Lionheart, died from a wound he received during the siege of the castle of Châlus-Chabrol in France. Richard III was killed in the Battle of Bosworth Field on August the 22nd, 1485. His remains were recently discovered and buried at Leicester Cathedral. Several kings were murdered or died in mysterious circumstances, including Edmund I, who was either assassinated or killed by a thief in 946. Edward the Martyr, died 978, was killed by his stepmother. William II, died 1100, in a hunting accident but was probably murdered. Edward II, died 1327, was imprisoned and murdered by having a red-hot poker inserted into his anus. Richard II, died 1400, was deposed and starved to death. Seems like all the Richards met an untimely end. Edward V, died 1483, who was 13, was almost certainly murdered by his uncle Richard III. Henry VI was deposed and died in the Tower of London in 1471, possibly murdered. 2 English monarchs have been executed, Lady Jane Grey in 1553 and Charles I in 1649. Technically, you could argue that a third monarch was executed, and that was Oliver Cromwell, if you consider him a monarch. He died of natural causes, but was executed after his death. His body was exhumed, and he was hanged in chains at Tyburn before being beheaded. His body was thrown into a common grave, and his head was placed on a spike above Westminster Hall. The shortest reigning monarch was Lady Jane Grey, who ruled for 9 days. The longest serving monarch was Queen Elizabeth II. Since 1066, there have been 38 kings and 5 queens, 6 if you include Lady Jane Grey. Henry VI was the only king to rule both England and France between 1422 and 1453. The last English king to lead an army was Henry VIII. In 1603, James VI of Scotland acceded to the throne of England, became James I of England. England and Scotland have shared the same monarch since then, although they continue to have separate parliaments until 1707, when the Kingdom of Great Britain was officially created with the Act of Union with Scotland. In 1801, the Act of Union with Ireland made Ireland part of the United Kingdom. Ireland got its independence in 1922, but Britain hung on to the northern part of Ireland, now referred to as Northern Ireland. If you're wondering about Wales, it had effectively been annexed by England by 1284, when King Edward I of England enacted the Statute of Rhuddlan. One English king fled the country, James II, or if you prefer, James VII of Scotland, in 1649, when Britain was invaded by the Dutch. This was the last successful invasion of Britain in what became known as the Glorious Revolution. Although no battle was fought, the crown passed to William of Orange and Mary. One English king has abdicated, Edward VIII, in 1936. Charles waited 70 years and 214 days to ascend to the throne in England, the longest wait of any monarch in history. Due to colonialism, the King of England is also the king of these independent countries: Antigua and Barbuda, Australia, the Bahamas, Barbados, Belize, Canada, Grenada, Jamaica, New Zealand, Papua New Guinea, St. Kitts and Nevis, St. Lucia, St. Vincent and the Grenadines, Solomon Islands and Tuvalu. How rich is the royal family? The wealth of the royal family, which is also known as the firm, is estimated at 21.3 billion. King Charles has a personal fortune estimated at around £500 million. Where do the royal family live? Royal residences include Buckingham Palace, Clarence House, Kensington Palace, St James's Palace, Holyrood Palace, Hillsborough Castle, Balmoral, Sandringham, and many more. It is indeed an impressive portfolio. They also own a huge amount of land and property across the UK, including retail parks, shopping centres. In London, they own the whole of Regent Street and half of St James. Where do the King and Queen live? Their residence of preference is his London home, Clarence House. Does the monarchy hold any power? The monarchy used to hold a lot of power, but it has gradually been reduced over the centuries. The Magna Carta in 1215 established that the monarch was not above the law. It set limits on the monarch's powers. It established property rights and the rights to a free trial. There was a civil war in England between 1642 and 1651, after which King Charles I was beheaded and Oliver Cromwell became Lord Protector. Even though the monarch was reinstated with Charles II, it returned with significantly less power. The Glorious Revolution of 1689 led to a Bill of Rights and guaranteed parliamentary supremacy over the monarchy. Yes, but what about now? Does the monarchy still have some power? In theory, all legislation must be signed by the monarch before it becomes law. However, the last time the monarch refused royal assent, as it is called, was in the 18th century. The monarch can also theoretically declare war and distribute honours, though in practice it's the government which does this. The last time the monarch exercised any real power was after the February 1974 general election, which resulted in a hung parliament with no political party in control, and a decision had to be made as to which party leader to call to be prime minister. But even in this scenario, it wasn't the Queen, but rather her advisors that took the vital decisions and advised her to call Harold Wilson to become the Prime Minister. However, the monarch does wield considerable influence. The palace has often requested changes to legislation. For example, in 2022, it was revealed that Prince Charles had written to the Prime Minister John Major in 1993 asking for a change to a housing bill, which he reluctantly did to avoid conflict with the palace. It hardly needs stating that the royal family are unelected. So where do they get their legitimacy from? One is tradition. They've been around for so long, and that itself is a form of legitimacy. And this longevity gives stability to the nation. Even if they are unelected, it is argued that they are popular. Now let's take a deeper dive into this last point. How popular are the royal family, really? Let's take the most recent opinion poll at the time of making this video, and it revealed that 62% of Brits support the continuation of the monarchy. And if we take a deep dive into the figures, we see something interesting. Britons between the ages of 16 and 24, only 36% want to keep the monarchy, compared to 40% who want to have an elected head of state. 53% of those aged between 25 and 49 supported keeping the monarchy. Support for the monarchy was highest amongst those over the age of 65, where 81% backed the monarchy. And just to give you my own anecdotal opinion of speaking to hundreds, perhaps thousands of people on this subject over the period of my lifetime, I would say that about a third of the people are staunch monarchists. A third are die-hard Republicans, and about a third just couldn't care less. They just don't give a monkeys because they don't see it as have any relevance to their lives. Now in London, where I come from, there is definitely a stronger support for republicanism than anywhere else in Britain, except perhaps in Scotland. In Scotland, only 9% of 16 to 24-year-olds support the monarchy. I see a correlation between areas in Britain supporting the monarchy and those supporting Brexit. That's my feeling, but I don't have the stats. So no, it's simply not true to say that the vast majority of Brits support the royal family. Why should we have a monarchy? Well, they have cultural and symbolic importance. The royal family has a long tradition and is intrinsically part of Britain. They provide continuity and stability, and the royal family plays an important constitutional role, and having a non-political head of state helps to maintain unity in the nation and is the basis of British democracy. The royal family, it is argued, brings in tourists and money for the country. What are the arguments against the royal family? They are unelected. It's not democratic. Who elected the king? Nobody. He did not get the job on merit. He inherited his position. The king stands a tiptoe upon an antiquated system of privilege, aristocracy, and inheritance that violates all notions of democracy. To quote Thomas Paine, it is people of talent, not high birth, who should lead the country. A hereditary governing class is as absurd as an hereditary mathematician or an hereditary wise man, and as ridiculous as an hereditary poet laureate. Personally, I quite like Charles. He's got a good sense of humour and he's campaigned for environmental issues and has interesting views on architectural matters. But then again, so is my friend Dave, and he's not the king. Allowing the accident of birth to determine our head of state is playing with fire. We've had some real assholes as monarchs in the past. Let me just give you one example. This guy, Edward VIII, who was king in 1936 until he abdicated. Now, the story goes that he abdicated because he wanted to marry a Catholic American divorcee, Wallis Simpson, and the government wouldn't allow it, so he chose his wife, his love, over the crown. It's the fairy tale told for the purposes of public relations. The real reason he abdicated was because he was a Nazi. He spied for the Germans in the period leading up to the Second World War and during the Second World War. The marriage to Wallis Simpson was just a fortuitous event that gave the government the excuse to get rid of him. The monarchy has weekly meetings with the Prime Minister where they discuss government policy of the day. Now, King Edward VIII would have the weekly meeting with the Prime Minister. They would go and have dinner with the German ambassador and pass on these secrets. The ambassador in question was von Ribbentrop, who was also believed to be Wallis Simpson's lover in 1936. Even his own father, George V, didn't trust him and had him bugged. And guess where Edward VIII chose to go on honeymoon? The Isle of Wight, the Maldives, the Seychelles? No, he went to Nazi Germany where he met Hitler. After his abdication, he was still a British officer, and the British government thought, well, he's a British officer, maybe we can make use of him. So they gave him the role of inspecting the French defences against Germany, the Maginot Line. And he made a very thorough report about the weaknesses of the Maginot Line, and he gave it to the French. The trouble is that he also gave it to the Germans. Now, that was an act of treason for which he could have been hanged. After the outbreak of war, he supported the bombing of Britain, his own country, as it would force Britain to negotiate. He said,
"If Germany bombed England effectively, this could bring peace."
Even the fairy tale romance story is fake. Wallis Simpson couldn't stand him even before their marriage. And during their marriage, she had numerous affairs. How do we know all this? Because he was spied on by MI5, by the FBI, and French intelligence. Nobody trusted him. And moving on to more recent times, what if it was not Prince Charles, but his younger brother, Prince Andrew, who became king? He has, shall we say, a more controversial past. Perhaps the royals too would lead happier, more meaningful lives if they were mere ordinary citizens like you and I. The media obsession with royal family is not good for us and it's not good for them. For example, Princess Diana was both deified and ridiculed by the media. She wasn't a great intellect and she made some poor life choices, but she didn't deserve the obsessive intrusion into every tiny aspect of her life, which, as we know, had fatal consequences. One aspect often raised is the money. Now, from a Republican perspective, the fact that the royal family is extremely wealthy, yes, they are, and there is no doubt that their billions could be used for more worthwhile causes, but I would argue that money is not really the issue here. Either you keep the monarchy or you don't, but what you can't say is, well, we should keep the monarchy but without the money. That makes no sense. You can't have a poor royal family. You can't have Charles and Camilla living in a 2-bedroom apartment in Surrey. If there is a royal family, of course, we want the best one. We want them to have palaces and castles. The question is whether royalty is compatible with democracy. Likewise, the argument that royalty brings in tourism is also, shall we say, a bit bogus. I'm not sure that many people say, let's visit Britain because I like the royal family. Well, they might want to visit the palaces and the castles, but France too has splendid royal palaces and chateaux, which are a huge draw for tourists, but they don't have a royalty. We all know what happened to them. I'd like to hear your views. Should we keep the royal family or ditch it in favour of something more democratic? There are many options. One is to have a purely ceremonial head of state without any power. We could choose an individual who has excelled in a particular field. It doesn't have to be a politician. It could be a scientist or a musician or a sportsman, someone who has actually contributed something to the country. Names that spring to mind off the top of my head include Paul McCartney, Judi Dench, or Gary Lineker. King Gary I. Why not? I'd vote for him. Let us know your thoughts in the comments. Who do you think would make a good head of state for Britain? And what should England replace its national anthem with? And what's the situation in your country? Let us know your thoughts. That's all for now. Bye.